Have you ever walked into a room and suddenly felt watched? Like every eye has locked onto you, analyzing every step, every movement, every little thing you might be doing wrong? That feeling, the fear of being perceived, is something we all experience. But why? And more importantly, what if I told you most people aren't even looking at you? This fear is so common and it has a name, the spotlight effect. It's the idea that we believe we're the center of attention far more than we actually are. But when this fear becomes more intense, persistent, and overwhelming, it's sometimes referred to as scopophobia, a deep-seated fear of being watched or judged by others.
Oh, you cooking something? I was gonna make some lunch, but I'll just wait. I'll wait till later.
Ooh, what are you doing? What are you reading? That looks interesting.
Just trying to read, but I'll do it later.
Ooh, what are you watching? I've been looking for a new series to watch.
Oh, I'm just watching. It's silly, really. To be honest, I don't know why I'm watching it.
Psychologists Thomas Gilovich and Kenneth Savitsky studied this phenomenon, showing that people routinely overestimate how much others notice them. They even ran an experiment where participants wore an embarrassing t-shirt, one with Barry Manilow's face on it, and then entered a room full of strangers. The result? The wearers believed that over half of the people in the room would notice and judge them. In reality, less than 25% of people even realized what they were wearing. Our brains are wired to think that the world revolves around us, but in reality, everyone else is too busy worrying about themselves to focus on us. And I think that this is something I've seen time and time again, even personally. I will always assume that people are talking poorly about me or don't like me. I'll always remember, and I've mentioned this example before, but my good friend Mamrie, I used to think hated me because she was always kind of standoffish and she seemed to not be having a good time when I was around. And so I was like, oh, I just don't think she really likes me. And it kind of bummed me out. And then fast forward a year later, we were at an event for VidCon in Amsterdam and we were all out having dinner and drinks. And she was like, yeah, I always tell people if they think I don't like them, it's probably because I'm having a panic attack. And then she referenced a time just the other day when that was happening, and I thought it was because she didn't like me. And so it just goes to show us that we often think people don't like us or that they're judging us or that they're noticing something about us, and they're not. They're in their own shit. They've got their own stuff going on too. At this point, you might be thinking, doesn't this sound like social anxiety? Well, yes and no. Social anxiety or social phobia is a broader mental health condition. It's characterized by an intense fear of social interactions, particularly situations where we might be scrutinized or judged. It's also often accompanied by emotional and cognitive symptoms, things like persistent worry about being embarrassed, judged, or rejected, fear of saying the wrong thing or making a mistake in a conversation, overanalyzing social interactions before, during, and especially after they happen. It could also be physical symptoms like sweating, trembling, or a racing heart, shortness of breath, or nausea when we're in social settings. We can avoid eye contact or have a difficult time speaking up in groups. And common triggers for it are things like public speaking or presentations, meeting new people, or engaging in small talk. Even eating in front of others. So that's social anxiety. Scopophobia is more specific. It's not just about social interactions. It's about the act of being observed or perceived. Someone with this fear might feel distress even in neutral situations where no conversation is happening. It can also include things like emotional and cognitive symptoms like feeling highly self-conscious, even in mundane situations. Fear of being stared at, even without negative intent. Remember, it's just the sheer thought of being perceived, right? We can have a discomfort with being recorded, photographed, or looked at directly, like in the eye. Or even physical symptoms can show up, like sudden panic or a strong urge to hide when people glance our way. We can feel dizzy, have muscle tension, or even feel frozen when we are noticed. We avoid eye contact, or we can position ourselves away from view, kind of like hiding behind something so that we're not so seen. And common triggers for scopophobia, or fear of being perceived, are things like walking down the street and feeling like strangers are watching us, standing in line at a store and sensing people behind us, or being in an open space like a park or a mall. We can kind of feel exposed, like there's nowhere to hide. So what's the difference? In short, all scopophobia is social anxiety, but not all social anxiety includes scopophobia. People with social anxiety fear interacting with others, worry about being judged, rejected, or embarrassed. And we're often concerned about how we're going to perform in social settings. People with scopophobia, however, fear the act of being perceived itself, whether or not judgment is involved. Even neutral attention, like someone glancing in our general direction, can feel deeply distressing. And this distinction helps explain why some people with scopophobia struggle in everyday environments where they aren't even expected to socialize, but feel overwhelmed by the idea of just being watched. So where does this fear come from? The answer lies in a mix of evolution, trauma, and shame.
But your fear of being perceived is just because you aren't used to being perceived without judgment. I think so many people that carry this fear of being perceived, it stems from insecurity and a whole lot of embarrassment and shame, and just having the people in our lives not fully understand us and not fully see us. So whenever we are perceived, it is filtered through judgment or criticism.
Humans are social creatures, and for most of our history, being accepted by the group was essential for survival. In small tribal communities, standing out in the wrong way, looking weak, awkward, or different could lead to exclusion. And in a world where you relied on your tribe for food, protection, and support, rejection wasn't just embarrassing, it could be deadly. Our brains are wired to detect social threats just as intensely as physical ones. Neuroscientists have found that social rejection triggers the same brain regions as physical pain. Specifically, the anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC, which is right behind our frontal lobe. Now, this part of the brain lights up whether you stub your toe or experience social exclusion. One famous study by Eisenberger in 2003 showed that being left out of a simple virtual ball tossing game activated the same pain processing brain areas as actual physical injury. In other words, our brains don't just dislike rejection, they treat it as an existential threat. Fascinating, right? So when someone experiences scopophobia or an intense fear of being perceived, it can be linked to this ancient survival instinct. The brain is essentially saying attention from others equals potential judgment, equals possible rejection, equals danger. For many people, the fear of being perceived is more than just evolution. It's personal. If you grew up in an environment where you were constantly judged, criticized, or shamed, whether by parents, peers, or authority figures, your brain may have just learned that being watched wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous.
What are you doing? Have you just been sitting there all day? Are you still crying over that boyfriend of yours? Don't be so dramatic. There are plenty of fish in the sea. And one day you're gonna look back and laugh at how upset you are over your high school boyfriend who you barely remember.
People who were bullied, especially if it happened repeatedly, often develop hyper-awareness of how they're perceived. If you were teased for the way that you looked, spoke, or acted, your brain might have built in a defense mechanism. If I stay invisible, I stay safe. If our parents or caregivers were constantly monitoring, correcting, or shaming our behavior, then we might grow into an adult who feels unsafe being observed. A child scolded for speaking too loudly in public may develop a lifelong fear of drawing attention to themselves. A teenager whose fashion choices were mocked might struggle to feel comfortable in any outfit, fearing judgment no matter what they wear. In some cultures and households, modesty, obedience, or perfectionism are heavily enforced. Children raised in these environments may grow up with intense self-surveillance, always wondering or thinking, am I being judged? Am I behaving correctly? Do I look acceptable? Many people with scopophobia also have a history of trauma, especially trauma related to humiliation, bullying, or emotional neglect. Studies suggest that PTSD can heighten hypervigilance, making someone feel constantly on edge, as if the world is watching and waiting for them to slip up. Evolution and past experiences already make some of us sensitive to being watched, but today's world amplifies this fear in new ways. We live in an age where cameras are everywhere. The fear of being recorded or turned into a meme can make some people feel trapped, kind of in a constant state of self-awareness. I'm sure you've heard some version of the phrase, pick or it didn't happen. We've heard that over the years. Our culture prioritizes visibility. And for those who fear being seen, it can be overwhelming. Unlike in the past, like when I was growing up, where judgment was often private and local, today's mistakes can be broadcast online instantly and stay there forever. Someone who trips in public might laugh it off, unless they fear a stranger filmed it and has uploaded it to TikTok, for example. Cancel culture, social shaming, and viral criticism can make it feel like any mistake, whether it's big or small, could be magnified and really weaponized. At its core, the fear of being perceived, it's about safety. Whether it stems from evolution, past trauma, or today's hyper-judgmental culture, the brain treats attention as a potential threat. For some of us, this fear is mild, just a bit of self-consciousness in social settings, but for others, it's overwhelming, leading to avoidance, anxiety, or even panic attacks. But the important thing to remember, you are not alone. Many people experience this fear, and there are ways to manage it. Next, we're going to explore strategies to cope with the fear of being watched and how to retrain your brain to feel safer in your own skin. So what can we do about it? It's easy to feel like everyone is watching, judging, or remembering every awkward thing you do. But remember, research suggests otherwise. There's this thing called the illusion of transparency. When you're nervous or self-conscious, you might feel like your emotions are written all over your face, like everyone can see how anxious, embarrassed, or awkward you feel. You might think people can tell that you're struggling, even if you're doing your best to hide it. But the truth is, others are usually unaware of your inner turmoil. Like the example I gave about Mamrie, I had no idea she was having a panic attack, even though she felt like it was obvious, or like if you think I'm just standoffish, it's because I'm having a panic attack, right? I had no idea. Most people are not as attuned to our emotions as we think. They're more likely focused on their own thoughts and feelings rather than scrutinizing yours. In fact, studies show that we overestimate how much others can detect of our internal state. It's like assuming everyone in the room can hear your heart racing or see your palm sweating, when in reality, it's hardly noticeable. This made me think of, I was recently at this FOSI event in DC in December, and the heat was on. You guys, I swear to God, it was like 80 degrees in that room. And I had to give a talk, and I was on this panel, and I was wearing like a sweater, like a wool sweater. The amount of sweat, it was so, I was like sure everybody could see, nobody could tell. So I know that's a random example, but it's hardly noticeable. So the illusion of transparency makes us feel exposed when we're really more shielded than we realize. Even if people notice, they forget fast. Let's say someone does notice something about you. Maybe you trip on the sidewalk. We've all done it. Stutter during a presentation, or wear mismatched socks. Will they remember? Not for long. There is something called the forgetting curve, and studies show that our brains rapidly forget details over time. Even if someone briefly judges you, their memory of the event will fade within hours or days because their brain is just busy filtering out unimportant information. And try this. If you don't believe me, try this. Think about someone you interacted with last week. Okay? You have them in your mind? Can you remember exactly what they wore? Or the small mistakes they made? Did they say anything kind of funny? Probably not. And if you can't recall those things about others, why do we assume that they're going to remember it about us? This brings me back to like why eyewitnesses are the least reliable. Like, especially as time goes on. I don't know if you guys love crime like I love crime, but I watch a lot of SVU. I listen to a lot of crime podcasts. I watch a lot of documentaries. And in those, they always share how the people who are eyewitnesses, the people who see things, first of all, don't always remember things correctly. They're the most unreliable. And as time goes on, it gets worse and worse and worse. And the percentages go down. I'm forgetting how much. But I feel like that's kind of why. It's this like forgetting curve. The fact that we only remember things for a short period of time and then it's lost forever. I do know also the only reasons we would remember like specific situations or specific information is if someone else told us about it too, we concurred and we talked about it again. So it's essentially like it has to keep happening. We have to have that experience again for us to possibly maybe remember it. So just keeping that in mind. The best way to overcome fear isn't to avoid it. I know, we wish we could, but it's actually to gradually face it in small, controlled ways. And this is the foundation of exposure therapy. It's a therapeutic technique that helps people reduce anxiety by systematically exposing themselves to their fears. Think of your fear like a muscle that needs training. If you try to lift something too heavy all at once, you'll feel overwhelmed. But if you start with lighter weights and increase gradually, you build strength over time. And here's how you can do this in real life. So for the first step, maybe we make brief eye contact with a stranger. And instead of looking away immediately, like, oh, hold their gaze for just a second, or maybe two if you can. Then step 2, initiate short interactions, like order something at a coffee shop with confidence, or ask a store employee a question like, where is the soap? Or give someone a casual compliment like, I love your shoes. I find coffee shops in general to be great for all of this because it's kind of like setting you up for these steps. But moving on to step 3, we can do something slightly noticeable. Maybe we wear a quirky t-shirt, carry an unusual accessory, or we speak up in a meeting. I know that one's hard, but it's important. And step 4, intentionally create a small, what I would call awkward moment, like sing quietly in public, maybe dance to your own music in your headphones. We wear mismatched socks on purpose, or we say hi to someone who wasn't actually waving at us or we don't really know, like, hey, morning. Each of these steps is going to teach our brain that being seen doesn't lead to disaster. Instead of panicking, we'll start to realize, hey, that wasn't actually so bad. Because it always feels really scary up front. But the cool thing about exposure therapy, the reason I love it, is that it's incredibly effective. And it's one of the only therapies where it's like one and done. If you go through exposure therapy, if you successfully make it to your like peak fear and calm yourself down and don't freak out, you don't have to do it again. Amazing. You might go in for like little, like if things get really stressful or if you're starting to feel it's coming back a little bit, you can go in for booster sessions, but it's pretty much one and done. I think that's a beautiful, amazing, and hopeful thing. One of the biggest fears behind scopophobia, or the fear of being perceived, and social anxiety is that making a mistake or looking weird will lead to rejection. But research suggests the opposite sometimes. A little awkwardness makes you even more relatable and likable. I actually find this to be true too, because do you ever follow people online or see people on Instagram, for example, that just their life just looks so perfect. They have all the things that you want. They're doing all the things you want to do, and everything just looks like they're the perfect friend, wife, husband, mother, father, whatever, best employee, super successful. It's all perfect. They're not really relatable. We don't really like them as much, or I find that to be true for me. I've actually unfollowed people like that because it made me feel worse about my own situation. And the truth is that this phenomenon that we like people who are a little quirky, a little weird, don't do things perfectly, is called the benign violation theory. I hadn't heard about this till I was doing research. Fascinating. So this concept, it comes from humor research, so comedians and just comedy in general, and it suggests that something is funny when it violates a social norm a little bit, but, and big butts don't lie, I'm just kidding, but it remains harmless. So it violates a social norm, but remains harmless. So an example would be if someone stumbles slightly, but recovers smoothly. Others might smile or laugh in an endearing way rather than mock them. Or if you tell a self-deprecating joke. I'm sure you know a lot of comedians do this. They make fun of themselves. So you tell a self-deprecating joke or embrace a small mistake that you made. People tend to find it charming rather than embarrassing. There's also the pratfall effect. Studies show that people who display small imperfections, like tripping, spilling coffee, it's like if I posted a picture on Instagram with like coffee down my side and I was like, how's your day going? Much more relatable than me with like a perfect white button up, that just, you see what I mean? And these people are actually perceived as more likable than those who seem perfect all the time. So instead of fearing social blunders, what if we embrace them? What if we saw awkward moments as a sign that we're human, not a failure? When you feel overwhelmed by the idea of being seen, ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen? For example, like people will laugh at me, let's say. Then we have to ask, is that actually true? Because most people are too busy with their own lives and their own heads to notice. This is also kind of an example of like checking your facts. Okay? Then even if it happens, is it really that bad? Embarrassment is usually pretty temporary, right? Often the things that we fear sound much worse in our heads than they actually are in reality. So take a little time and walk yourself through those steps and just consider before you allow the freak out, before you push away and avoid or, send yourself into a frenzy and have a panic attack again, let's consider. Next time you feel that creeping fear, the worry that you're being watched, judged, or scrutinized, remember, the world is not a stage, and you're not the lead actor in everyone's story. The fear of being perceived is real, but it's also an illusion. And the moment you stop worrying about what others think is the moment you set yourself free. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe for more insights into how our brains really work. See you next time.